Chris to crack on with the first talk, so enjoy.
Thank you. Hi everyone, my name is Filip. I'm a third year computer game design student at University Campus Suffolk in Ipswich here in the United Kingdom. And I've only recently been introduced to the OSM community, working as an intern for ITO World. So ever since I joined, I tried to be a small part of the community and understand what's going on. I joined mailing lists, I did my share of edits. But one thing that I've kept seeing as a concept being talked about, and I think today's conference is an example of that, is the word gamification. And I thought I'd be able to talk about that since I'm a game designer and this is frankly what I do. So I'd like to share with you my thoughts on this and what the risks would be if we were to gamify data entry for OSM, and also what the rewards would be for us. So let's have a look at what gamification is. First, gamification is the process, the activity of using, the process through which you use game design concepts and tools such as mechanics, dynamics, and aesthetics in order to make an activity which might seem boring and tedious, fun and addictive. And I think there are quite a few good examples of that. Let's have a look. First, this is a screenshot I took this morning from Stack Overflow. And this is a website that applied a small gamification technique in order to sort their moderation system. They had the task of needing a way to understand which threads were the most important ones and which answers were the best ones. So they could either hire moderators from the community in order to sort this, or they implemented the upvote, downvote system and let the community sort itself out. And again, it's a crowdsourcing system that works, and that's become quite second nature to a lot of us. I'm just, oh yeah, I like this question, no, this answer's rubbish, and so on. So they managed to do this, and it's quite successful. And you can see it applied in a lot of other sites such as Reddit and YouTube and Facebook. Then you have the Free Rice initiative from the World Food Program, which had two tasks that they wanted to approach. The first one was, well, we need sponsors in order to give people food, in this case, rice. And we also would like for the community to learn English. So what they did was they created this matching game where you were given a word in English and you had to choose a synonym. And for each right answer that you gave, a sponsor would donate 10 grains of rice. And it's a really simple game and it's quite effective. You end up learning English and you're also helping a community, a developing country. So they had their task, which they could have gone and find sponsors and promise a lot of things for, but they ended up doing a fun activity and in the end an educational one through gamification. And then we have the example of Foursquare. If you were given the task of mapping most of the restaurants and pubs and other places in the world and having to give a review for, what would you do as a company? Well, on one hand, you could go and hire a lot of critics and reviewers and send them in random parts of the world and pay them a lot in order to give you good reviews. Or you could create a small mobile app through which you'd encourage users to go and give you their own reviews in exchange for stuff like badges and eventually being the mayor of places. And this is hugely successful. How many of you have used Foursquare before? Yeah, that's about 50% of the people in the room. So you could see that instead of spending a lot of money on critics, they spend a little bit of money on creating a gamified system, and they currently have over 27 million places on Foursquare with more than 3 million check-ins per month since January this year. So it's quite useful, and all they did was they analyzed the community, they realized what the needs of the community were, and they just made a game out of it. Now, I saw that a lot of you have heard about Foursquare. How many of you have heard about Google badges? Okay, a couple of people. The reason why many of you haven't heard about it is because it was Google's shot at a gamification system, and it went wrong. Basically, what they did was, as you read news on their news website, you randomly got pop-ups which said, hey, congratulations, you've read a science article. Hey, congratulations, you've read 5 science articles. Nice, here, have an extra star. So, people didn't necessarily, it didn't necessarily stick with people, and one of the reasons why it didn't stick with people was because people already were there to read news. They didn't need any extra incentive to read news. So you could say that people were doing it because they were intrinsically motivated. They liked doing it for the sake of doing it. And I think that we can learn from their failure. This is a picture that was featured in June, I think, on OpenStreetMap Wiki, from a mapping party in Romania, the country where I'm from originally. And these were mappers from all around the Baltic community, from a Comenius project in partnership with the European Union. And the reason why they did this mapping thing, and why most people in the OSM community, I believe, map, is because we like doing it. We like completing the map. We like having an accurate map. So that's one of the motivations that keeps us on OSM. What could another one be? Well, obviously, as you've seen from mailing lists, there's people here whose word counts more than others, who have a better status in the OSM community. And also, I believe, there's people who can influence and change the way OpenStreetMap looks, who are in charge of the plugins and everything that everybody sees. And that's just a select few. And obviously there's people who do it, who work for companies who use OpenStreetMap commercially, who also get paid in order to map. So with all of these different types of users and different types of motivations, you could almost say that we're more or less having a multiplayer experience. Well, from a game design perspective, we've been taught that there are 4 types of players in multiplayer games. And I believe that this can easily be applied to the OSM community. First, we're being told that there are the achievers, the people who like to achieve things. So these would be the people who want to say, oh, I've been the first one on that mountain in order to map that peak. Or I mapped this river, I mapped this whole community. Look at me, look at how awesome I am. Then you have the explorers, the people who just want to have the map as complete as possible, the people who map for the sake of mapping and are content with just exploring the map. Then you have the socializers, the people who love the idea of the community, who like the OSM community, and who map in order to be a part of that community. And then lastly, you have the killers, the people who will stop at nothing in order to win. And I think a lot of us have seen them on the mailing lists. So, with all these considered, what are the risks of using a gamification system for OpenStreetMap? Well, first and foremost, I believe we should be wary of cheating. This would mean that people add wrong nodes or would just make a program that moves everything slightly to the right in order to gain more points or whatever we decide to award them. And that's not good because it diminishes map quality, and that's already something that we're looking at in OSM. So we need to be very wary of that. Then you'd have people who would fight in turf wars, who would eventually be able to split the community in two over a small issue, such as, no, that's my street. How dare you touch that street? I made that street in OSM myself. And these people are disruptors as well. And with these two in mind, we need to realize that in order to correct their mistakes and their illegal edits, you would have to have a really high moderation cost. And I don't think that's something that the community should necessarily do. We should be looking forward and look at in what ways we could improve OpenStreetMap. And at the same time, we need to be careful not to fall into Google's mistake and say, congratulations, you have just edited your first node when you already have 3,000 edits in the backlog. So we need to be careful not to demotivate the experienced users and not to patronize them. So with all of these considered, I'd like to extend the discussions, this discussion onto you, to open it up to you, and ask you, what do you see as ways of using gamification in OpenStreetMap? I'd like to have a discussion.
Oh, so.
I was just saying that it might make more sense for me to show my presentation now.
Oh, and then do a
Because
discussion.
we'll follow
Sorry.
very, very well, I think.
Oh, okay.
The discussion afterwards. Yes.
Okay,
That makes sense.
happy to go. Well, the only problem with that is if the other people in the other room come in, so it might be better to carry the customer. Sorry, Derek, it's a good idea though. And the microphone.
Okay, I think we can eliminate most of these risks by offering like empty spaces in Africa.
Right.
So there's nobody who says this is my street. There are no old edits, so you can really motivate people to map a new town in Africa by the nice available imaginary aerial imaginary.
Right, that's a really good example. Just pick an open place and say map there. But then what will you do for places that are already mapped, such as, I don't know, South Africa? I think it's quite well mapped.
So it doesn't work there.
Okay, and this approach could work. You just need to be careful in how you direct users to that place. Because obviously if you have this scheme and just say the three of you work together on this part of the world, what will happen if another mapper randomly stumbles onto their turf and edits there? So I think that we should have a look at the community and see what the most common reasons for fighting are, and try and have an approach from that side. In order, we need to understand the community and then apply these schemes to them. But yeah, that's a really good idea.
So as one of the few people who've actually been part of writing a game for OpenStreetMap, so I'm one of the authors of Map Roulette.
Right.
One of the choices we made purposefully, especially in the redesign that we're working on, is not to have any type of scoring system.
Right.
So we don't say, oh, you've got 50 points, or you're ranked, or we just let that continue to be the intrinsic value of a mapper. And there's a question in my mind, is that really the right way to go? Because it addresses, all these issues of, well, cheating because there's no intrinsic benefit, but it also doesn't demotivate existing mappers. But I want to hear your thoughts on that issue.
That's a word of advice. We don't necessarily need to be using points, badges, and leaderboards and say, suddenly, that's gamification. We have a good game about us. Being careful with those and maybe just not using them at all is a really good way of solving disputes. But I'm not very familiar with Map Roulette. Could you? Okay.
Not me? All right. So I found Map Roulette really addictive because I like improving the map rights. But I don't think that is necessarily something that you be able to expand past the already existing mappers. And motivating that group instead of people contributing to Foursquare is one of my points of view there.
Which is part of the whole process of the project.
You have a very, just a second. You have a very good point there. How do we involve new users? Because obviously, from what I understood, if you've heard of Court, the game, most of the users are already members of the OSM community. So the idea is, what's Foursquare doing right? And there's this whole, oh, my friend's using it, so I should use it as well, and applying it to new users. But yeah. Yeah, Peter?
Okay, I was just going to make an observation around the mapping of unmapped areas. And I don't know, I can't even remember the name for it. It's the task manager,
Hot tasking manager.
the hot tasking manager, where basically you say, I'll do this square. You can leave the square alone, I'll do it. But the sense that I think the game is that the multiplayer game element of that is you get a sense that other people are picking up other parts. So suddenly it seems to be possible to map a very large area because you've done some and some people have done other ones. And I think, I mean, looking back on it, the work we did with OSM analysis where we produced a map, as soon as we produced a map which had loads of red on it saying this isn't very good, and it was our definition of what not very good was, actually a load of people started mapping. We not only did we not have any leaderboards, we had no idea who was doing the mapping. You had to go into a different application and fiddle around to try and work out who was mapping. And when we were trying to work out who was mapping Bradford, we couldn't even work it out. I apologise, even we were meant to know about data. But we'd had a little bit of time because we were sort of coming into their patch. Anyway, it was just this idea that you've got a game but you don't actually have leaderboards, I think is quite important.
Yeah, it's good to fragment the data that you need to map, and that's where in games you have quests. Yeah, you have this whole thing. You have to go and rescue the princess from the castle, but first you must break it into a few parts in order to have the player evolve from part to part, and that's where the guys at HOT are doing it really well with their grid style, because everybody has a sizable chunk, manageable chunk of information that they need to add. Yeah.
Yeah. So one aspect that's also interesting to look at is in which direction do you want to direct people's motivation to contribute? A recurring theme in a few talks was it's much easier to add new things than to maintain existing things for a whole range of reasons. So also the example that you just gave, that was a great example of how you can direct activity without being pushy, without being prescriptive, yeah, that's just an additional element to consider.
So first, when you give somebody a grid or whatever sort of grid that might be, or quests, you give your players meaningful choices, and that's one of the first things that we learn in game design. In order to make a game, your players must have meaningful choices, and generally the fun is drawn from that. So that's really good. You can map this square over here, or that square over here, or that square over there, whichever you feel like doing today. And it's not an issue of saying you must do that, but of asking your players, do you want to do this or do you want to do that? That one might be harder, but it might be more rewarding. So that's one thing that I wanted to say. And the other one is, I'm sorry. What was your initial comment?
It's easier to add than to...
Yeah, so maintaining data. If you were to do this by an alternate system, you could have, well, congratulations, you just added something to the map. But wouldn't you be nice enough in order to go and check if that phone box is still over there? And just tell me yes or no. You don't need to add any extra information, just say yes or no, that's still there. So it's a difference between telling your players, well, you can add this amount of information and it will take you 2 or 3 minutes, or you could just look over there and click a button. And again, you're giving them this choice. Do I want to do more work in order to add something to the map, which maybe I'll be able to see in 2 minutes when the map next refreshes? Or do I just want something simple? I just want to walk through town and say, yeah, that's there, yeah, that's there, and so on. So it's just managing these two types of tasks. Okay, thank you very much.